Alright, this is for anybody that uses a TI-83 or TI-84 calculator. They're very similar. So I'm just going to go through the basics in case you've never even picked one up before. And these will be things that you'll use, throughout the year and into the future of this calculator. So the first thing I want you to do is, well, hopefully you know how to turn it on. Of course, your on button right here. So turn it on. This is what I call your home screen. So I think you can probably do the basics. So if you wanted to do 10, plus 50, enter gives you obviously 60. So you have all your keys, basic keys over here, enters your equal sign. Find your mode button, and actually notice above all your keys there are things in blue. So if you press your second button, so for example if you wanted to do 10 plus 50, but you wanted, instead of that 10, you wanted it to be 100. If you try to type in 100, notice it'll overwrite that plus sign. So you can insert. Insert is above delete, so if you do second delete, I can reinsert that plus sign. And it flashes kind of like that over the 5 to know that you're still in insert mode. Of course, if I arrow over, now I'm out of insert mode. So you can always insert things that's above your delete, or for that matter, delete, right? So if I wanted to delete that, that 100, I just press delete and it'll do so for me. Your mode button is right next to your second key. If you press mode, and I know, at any point press pause on this video and check yours out. It might be kind of hard to see mine on the video, but you want to make sure you're in normal mode. If you're in scientific mode, don't need to do this, but I'm just going to show you what will happen if I'm in scientific mode. It will give you everything in terms of times 10 to the whatever power. So instead of 60, notice it did 6e, which means times 10 to the first, so it's really 60. You can certainly be in scientific mode, but no need to do that. Just set your mode to float, and by the way, your new calculators, everything will be just formatted down the left hand side there, but set to float. If you want your numbers to be rounded to 2 decimals, then you would set it to 2, but don't do that, because if you have a 4-digit number, it's going to round to 2 digits, and obviously you don't want that to happen. Radian degree mode, we'll get into that much later into the term, but obviously it's 2 different modes. For now you can really be in either mode, it does not matter. Make sure you're in function mode, parametric, polar, sequential mode, those are all modes you'll explore later in your math career. And then you have connected versus dotted, that's for graphing stuff. Everything else, just make sure you're kind of on the left hand side of the screen. And then you have, if you want your answers to be automatically, means if you type something in as a fraction, you want your answer to be also a fraction, or if you type something in as a decimal, you want your answer to be a decimal. If you always want your answer to be a decimal, choose that. If you always want your answer to be a fraction, choose that. 83s, you don't have some of this because it's not as new, updated as a new 84. Some 84s don't even have this option, and that's okay. That's really nothing to worry about because I'm going to show you what you can do. So that's your mode. Speaking of fraction, let's do a fraction. So let's say I wanted to do 1/2. I have to do 1 divided by 2, and that's how you enter a fraction. They don't have any cutesy fraction buttons like your old scientific calculators. Let's say I wanted to do 1/2 plus 2/3. Actually, I'm going to clear this. In parentheses, I'm going to do 1/2. I would get used to putting your fractions in parentheses for purposes of like when you're dividing. 1/2, let's just do divided by 2/5. Okay, and notice I did 2/5 in parentheses. So again, 1/2 in parentheses, your division key. That's how you do fractions. And when you press enter, you get 1.25. Okay, so let's say, even though I know what that is, I'm sure you do also, but I want that as a fraction. I don't want that as a decimal answer. If you go to your math button, press math, and notice number 1 says fraction, choose fraction. What it's going to do is it's going to take your previous answer, 1.25, and change it, that's what that arrow means, change it to a fraction. So if you press enter, it will give you 5/4. So that's how you deal with fractions. So parentheses are important. How do you change decimals to fractions? Just some, and if you forget this stuff, well, A, rewatch the video or talk to your teacher. Negative versus subtraction. So obviously this is subtraction and this is negative. They don't, you can't overlap them. So if I want to do 5 minus 6, of course that's negative 1. Great. If I do 5 and then negative 6, that is going to give you a syntax error because it has no idea what you're asking it to do. So they're different. So understand your negative is here, subtraction is here. Fractions with quantities. So let's say I wanted to do 2 plus 5 divided by 3 minus 7. So in parentheses I need to do 2 plus 5 and then divided by, I don't even remember what I said, 5 minus 7. Okay, so quantities, fractions that involve quantities, again making sure that I have those parentheses in the numerator and the denominator, and I'll get negative 3.5. Now if I'm going to go back and, whoopsies, sorry, I'm going to go back and eliminate those parentheses just to show you what can happen. Your calculator follows order of operations to the T. So what it's going to do, of course, order of operations, it's going to divide this 5 divided by 5 first, and you're not going to get negative 3.5 anymore. So it's real important to understand that you want those quantity parentheses up there versus not. Lastly, I'm just going to kind of, all these buttons up here, you know, check them out for sure. Eventually, you're going to be covering all these buttons, but I'm just covering the very basics that you're going to need to know for the duration of your math course. So how to graph something, you're going to be doing a lot of graphing in Algebra 2. So if you go to your y equals, and before you do that, notice next to that is a window, next to that is your zoom, trace, and graph. And then above those in blue are things that you'll be using eventually also. But I'm just going to show you basics of graphing. So press your y equals. You should see that. Everything probably is clear unless you clear it out unless you've done stuff. So you might have functions entered in there. These plots up here should not be highlighted. If they are, if you go on top of it and press enter, that's going to highlight it and that's going to graph a plot for you, which is like a scatter plot. So I'm going to press enter on it again to turn that off. Let's just do a basic linear function because you're familiar with those. So let's say you want to do y equals 2x plus 1. So I type in 2. Now your X key is right here, and I would become comfortable with using that as your X key versus like your X button here in green. Okay, so 2x plus 1, and you can press enter and it'll automatically store that function in there. Now if you go to your zoom, okay, well actually let's just do this. Just press your graph key. Okay, when you press graph, wherever your window was set at last is how it's going to graph that line. So if you've graphed a crazy function before this, you might not even see what I see. Okay, so what I usually do before I press graph is I go to my zoom, and you can do all sorts of things, and things you're probably going to utilize more than others are zoom in and zoom out if you want to try to zoom in on something or vice versa. Zoom standard, notice number 6 there, zoom standard, will give you a nice 10 by 10 window. And that's where I always start my graph. So I'm going to do a zoom standard, which you see what I saw before, but maybe you don't. And you see that nice linear line with y-intercept of 1 and a slope of 2. You can press trace, okay, which is going to give you a little cursor, and it's going to tell you your equation up here. It's going to tell you where your cursor is, so trace along that line, go to the right, go to the left, whatever, and you see where you're at on that line. That's what trace does. If you wanted to zoom in on it, you can do zoom in. Okay, that's number 2. And what it's going to do is it's going to put the cursor wherever you left off, and you can zoom in wherever. So let's say you wanted to try to zoom in on that y-intercept. So I'm going to bring my little cursor, which I hope you can see it's right there. It's really kind of little, but bring that down to try to hone in on my y-intercept. And then you press enter, and it's going to zoom in on where that cursor was. And you can do the same with zoom out. Again, these are just kind of basics. For sure, ask your teacher. Again, you know, if you have questions, your fraction, or excuse me, your square root is above your x squared key. So, you know, you would do second that. You have parentheses here, right? Here's a caret key. So if you wanted to do 2 cubed, you would do 2 raised to the 3rd. So those might be things you need to know.